So, this presentation, I'm going to give you guys an overview of the Apple Lisa and what some of the common problems you will encounter if you were looking to get into using these systems. So first of all, who here has heard of the Apple Lisa before? Who's used one? And who owns one? Okay, good. So I've got some people to talk to. So the first thing that I wanted to go over is what an Apple Lisa is not. The Lisa is not a copy of the Xerox Alto. I'm sure we've all read the story where Steve Jobs collected up all of his troop of engineers and shipped them down to Xerox, and they were oohed and awed by Xerox staff. There are definitely elements in the Lisa which are inspired by Xerox, and there was a fair bit of staff that left Xerox to go work on the Lisa project. But the two systems are actually quite different. For example, this doesn't have overlapping windows, and cut and paste works very differently. The other thing that a Lisa is not is a fat Macintosh. The two systems are built conceptually different. The Lisa has no part of its operating system in the ROM, whereas on the Mac, a lot of low-level system calls live in the ROM. That's an extra fat Mac, by the way, if you couldn't tell.
No memory management.
Yeah, the Lisa has a memory management unit. It's got significantly more memory. It has upgrade slots, and it is OS independent. There are, I think, 5 different OSs that people have found that can run on this thing. So, oops. A little bit of quick stats. Lisa is a 68,000 machine. Apple, in the late 70s, wanted to design the next generation of office computer for business professionals. And early on, they decided that they were going to need the power of the 68,000 to accomplish that. It has a 720 by 360 display, black and white, and part of that decision of it being an office computer is that the pixels on the screen are not square. They are twice as wide as they are tall, so that you can display the full width of a page of text. But then scrolling was easy, so you'd have to scroll to fit each half of the document on the screen, but that kept hardware costs down. It has a 76 keyboard with N key rollover and country codes. In the ROM of the keyboard, this one would say it's a North American US keyboard. When the system powers on, it asks the keyboard, hey, what country are you from? And say, for example, I had plugged a German keyboard into the system instead of a US English one. The operating system can say, oh, there's a German keyboard connected. Make all of the system prompts in German. Has a one-button mouse. And this is one of the first, if not the first, inexpensive commercially available mice. Prior to this, like on the Xerox machine, a mouse was a precision laboratory instrument with contact encoders and a steel ball bearing for the ball, and to clean it you had to take it apart. This was the first mouse that you could do that with. And Apple figured out how to do a high precision injected molded plastic case and make a mouse for less than $40. The system's shipped with a megabyte of RAM. And that is where the bulk of the cost of one of these machines comes from. Think of comparable systems at the time. Commodore 64, 64 kilobytes of RAM. In the original Lisa, the RAM alone cost about $5,000 in parts cost to Apple. The original machines had a product from Apple's disk division called Twiggy disks. Apple figured out how to squeeze 871 kilobytes of data onto a high-density floppy disk. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. As we said earlier, it's got a memory management unit. It has a swap file, so it will actually page memory to the hard disk. And the entire case is designed in a toolless manner. Everything is on clips or thumb screws. And Apple wanted the secretary in the office to be able to say, hey, my Lisa isn't working. Oh, well, we'll just ship you this whole replacement unit. You undo this one screw, slide the old one out, pop the new one in, and the system's ready to go again. The systems also had one of these beasties originally. This one's in particularly poor shape, but this is what Apple calls the profile hard disk, and it contains inside a Seagate ST506 disk mechanism, which was the first 5¼ inch hard drive designed for personal computers. And then this large card here off to the side is an intelligent disk controller, much like an IDE drive. So Apple would buy these disk mechanisms from Seagate, either get them without or throw away the electronics that came with the drives, put their own boards on them, and then hook them up to an intelligent controller. And this has a Z8 microprocessor on it. Every time you turn one of these drives on, it does a full sector test, and if it detects any bad sectors, it will automatically spare them, transparent to the operating system. So the operating system just tells the disk, hey, give me the data at sector 43, and the disk hands it back. There are 3 models of Lisas. The original model, the Lisa 1. There's the 2.5, which is what this system is, and the 2.10. There were a variety of operating systems. Like the Mac, unlike the Mac, this was not kind of locked into one deal. So you had the Lisa Office system, the Lisa Programming Workshop, which is what the Macintosh was programmed in. You had Microsoft Unix. There was Unisoft Unix. And then I've listed over here MacWorks. What that was is a bootloader that would take the Mac ROMs and put them into the system RAM, boot them up, and then the system at that point became a big Macintosh. Oh, it wasn't emulated. It was running the actual
They used the
actual
memory
code.
management unit
Yeah.
to remap because
Yeah.
a lot of the original design team were mainframe people. So they wanted mainframe memory management and segmentation in there. There's a lot of features in Lisa that didn't come around until like OS X
Yeah.
on the Mac. But they used the memory management utility just to remap the entire memory map and video and everything to match what the Mac had. And it just ran, no emulation.
Yep. And that's what also made that MMU is what made the Unix possible to run on this system. For example, in Xenix, you have multiple terminals on the screen of the system, and when you flip back and forth between them, it's actually the memory management unit switching out where the frame buffer sits, so it can do a swap really, really quick.
The one we missed there is it was COBOL too, as an environment.
Oh yeah.
Because they thought you could do, small office COBOL.
And there was some early docs from like '83 that they said, oh, MS-DOS is coming to the system as well. I don't think that ever shipped, but they had great plans for the Lisa architecture to continue on for many, many years. So in the software, the Office system is the bespoke operating system, and the Office suite they called the 7.7 because it's 7 applications working as one. There was very little third-party software ever made for the Lisa. There was a phone dialer and calendar application. There was a database, and there was some clip art software that was made, but that was about it, because the system only ran from 83 to 85. And of course, as I said earlier, you could run Macintosh OS on the system with MacWorks, which was loading the Mac ROMs in place. So this is a Lisa 1 as they originally shipped in 1983. Some features to note on the keyboard: they had these little pull-out cards to help you learn how to use the system, because nobody had ever used a computer with a mouse before. So there's instructions on here on how to double-click on things or click and drag on things. You have the 12-inch bitmap display, profile hard disk, and then the two 871K Twiggy floppy drives. So if you were to find one of these today, possible argument you might have is, dude, you should totally flip this thing on eBay and put silly things in the listing title. And that is because these Twiggy disk drives are very, very hard to come by at this point. And what makes the Lisa 1 system one of the more rare Apple items that you could obtain.
Sorry.
Mhm.
I'm being told that maybe we should turn like this hard to see the.
Oh, okay. So, cool. So these disks were, not only was the disk drive designed and manufactured by Apple, the media was bespoke to those drives. The drives had the clamping was done electronically, the eject was done electronically, and the drives were run by actually a cut-down Apple II that lives on the I/O card in the back of the system. And the media looked like this. And this is the only flexible media that existed that you could read and write from at the same time. The disk had a read head and read-write head on the top and on the bottom, but they were opposite of the spindle. And on the opposite side was just a felt gripper pad, so it could actually read and write. The heads wouldn't interfere. I don't know if that feature was ever used in the operating system, but from a hardware standpoint, this is the only drive to ever do that. Unfortunately,
The name was FileWare,
yeah,
not Twiggy. Twiggy was the.
Twiggy was the name of the disk. The FileWare was the media. Apple had great plans for FileWare and the Twiggy drives. They had intended to launch it with the Apple III. It wasn't ready in time. They had intended to put it in the Macintosh. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite as reliable as they would have liked. And as we all know, the Mac shipped with the Sony 3.5-inch 400K drive in 1984. And at that time, Apple took the Lisa 1 and converted it to the Lisa 2, replacing the discs, the 5.25-inch discs with the single 3.5-inch disc, and selling a model that had less memory as a Lisa 2, more memory in the profiles of Lisa 2.5, and then a system with an internal hard disk and some other modifications as the Lisa 2.10. And for the Lisa 1 owners, Apple had a nice program where you could take the computer back to the dealer, and they would take the 5.25 drives out, put in a 3.5-inch drive, change the ROMs, install a new faceplate, put this little converter card in that would connect the Sony drive in place of the original Apple drives, and give you new 3.5-inch discs to use with the system. That was a free upgrade. So the only Lisa ones that are left are ones that weren't taken back to Apple in the mid-'80s and upgraded for free. Twiggies are extremely rare. In talking with the mailing list, I think people have said there might be 30 or 50 of the machines left.
Yeah, maybe even that.
Yeah, and that's like total, not even working. They're very difficult to come by at this point.
And most of the ones we see are Franken ones. They're Twiggy drives were found and then put back
Yeah,
in.
back converted.
Very few original unmodified.
Mhm. And that, to me, is kind of an interesting observation, is that from a hardware point of view, the only real difference between this system sitting here, which was pretty commonly available, and the Lisa 1 is the floppy drives. The rest of the hardware is essentially identical. So on that Lisa 210, we got another product from Apple's disk division. They manufactured their own hard drive. It's a 10 meg disk. It had a voice coil actuator. It had an optical head position encoder. It had automatic servo tracking on the disk. And that was accomplished by having essentially another whole computer subsystem on the hard drive. So you had a disk with the read-write amplifiers on it, a separate self-contained card that handled positioning the head. This card communicates with the disk controller over a 56K serial line, and then the disk controller itself connects back to the system I/O board. And much like this drive, where you're able to do hey, give me the data at sector 300, it does that too, automatic sector sparing and a full test every time the disk gets turned on. Apple patented this drive, and one thing you have to look out for with these drives is that this glass graticule that lives up at the top is glued to this metal plate, and sometimes that glue will fail. So if you ever are turning on one of these for the first time, pick the disk up and just turn it over gently in your hands. If you hear it rattling, stop. You can fix the drive at that point. Here's a closer shot of that graticule. Because it is possible to, unlike a lot of other voice coil actuator drives, it is possible to low-level format these. So what I wanted to see, how are we doing on time? I'm going to skip this tour right now. I guess one thing I could show real quick. So this system is a 2.5, similar to a Lisa 1. Visually, it is easy to identify which of the two systems they are from the back. The Lisa 1 and Lisa 2.5 has a parallel port on the back in addition to the two serial ports. On the 210, that port was routed internally to connect to the internal hard drive. So someone shows you a picture of the back of the system, you can tell which you have. Yeah?
Do you know why Apple didn't replace the two 5.25-inch Twiggy drives with two 3.5-inch drives? Is there anything written about that?
I have not seen any reason why they didn't do that. And I don't think electrically there's any reason why they couldn't have done
Probably
that.
more because the floppies are only used to load software.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember, these machines were intended for hard drives. Just because the hard drive sat on top, it's because look at the size of it. Took a year later for them to get it inside. They were hard drive. The Lisa OS doesn't really run off a floppy.
When they were doing development in the late 70s, they were hoping to have the system work just from floppies. That very quickly was realized that's not going to happen. So yeah, it is a hard disk-based system. And you can't run the Lisa Office system software without a hard drive, which can actually be a bit of a challenge at this point to find one of these that's still functioning. The other thing I would point out is that the Lisa mouse and the Macintosh mouse, although they are electrically the same and contain the same circuit board inside, are visually not the same. The Mac mouse has the big fat button, and the Lisa mouse has the little thin button. Additionally, the connector is different. On the Mac, you had the kind of traditional square connector, and on the Lisa 1 and Lisa 2.5, you had this connector with like a squeezy tab deal.
But the 210 came with the Mac mouse, right?
Some did.
No, some did.
Some did. The later ones did. The later 210s came with a Mac mouse. My 210 that is sitting over there came with a Mac mouse originally. If we go back
Those
to,
original mice were worth a fortune.
yes. Yes, they are. If we look at this picture from, this is like the sales brochure. Macintosh has a Mac mouse, and then they're showing a Lisa-style mouse on each one of the systems. And something that I noticed is that you can't plug a Mac mouse physically into the early systems because of the shape of the connector. You would have to break the tabs off to do it. And on this I/O card cage, that's been done on this other kind of sad-looking one. So that's kind of a way you can tell if the system's ever been monkeyed with. So let me go back here. So another thing that goes wrong with these systems, and this is a pretty much 100% failure rate item for these machines, is the keyboard. These systems employ the Keytronic butterfly switch. It is a capacitive, non-contact switch, which Keytronic was very, very proud of. It appeared in a number of other systems in the 80s.
They dated back to the late 70s.
Mm-hmm. And this is the board inside of the system. And these are not contacts. These are capacitive sensing pads. And on the underside of each keyboard key,
That looks about right.
yeah, there is a little plastic disc, a piece of squishy foam, and then a piece of mylar with the conductive side up. So this side is, well, this one's still shiny. Yeah, real thin mylar, the conductive side is up. So you can actually type on one of these with the board just by touching it with your fingers. But the foam turns to goo, and whereas the contacts are supposed to look like this, when the foam goes bad, they end up looking like that, and then either none of the keys will work, or it'll just be pressing all the keys all the time. So if you get one of these systems, you're going to have to take out all the million little screws inside of the keyboard, get yourself a leather punch, and start making keyboard circles. Lots and lots of keyboard circles.
Careful not to break the cable for the keyboard. Super impossible.
Yes. Yeah, the keyboard cable. And if you come to my booth later on, I can show you some more of this. The keyboard, the one good thing about the keyboard is it's all held together with screws. There's nothing that you have to snap or destroy, unlike a Model M. So you have the the electronics, with the board with all of the capacitive sense pads, the base with the cable which is permanently attached. I don't know how they got that in there, but where it goes through the lower chassis is not removable without significant force and likely damage. In evidence of some of the, I guess, mini computer design elements that made it into the Lisa, it's the same type of plug as a DEC VT100 with the tip ring sleeve connector. Then on the keyboard itself, under each key there's a coil spring, and then as you press the keys, that brings the capacitive pads close to the board, and it will register. If you get one of these systems, if it's just got a couple of dead keys, you might be tempted to say, well, I'll just fix the couple that are bad. Don't fall for it. Replace all the pads at this point, because you'll start using the system and then other keys will fail and you'll just be frustrated. So two other things that are important with the Lisa keyboard is, one, In order to remove the space bar, it is safest to remove the circuit board and then disengage the posts on the stabilizer bar from underneath. If you try and pull it up, just to pull the space bar off of the keyboard, you'll very likely break the tabs on the pieces that engage the space bar. The good news is they're reversible, so you can flip them around to get one more shot, but better to not break it. The other piece of information is that under no circumstances should you ever take apart the latching mechanism for the caps lock key. Inside,
Little spring.
there is a microscopic spring which pushes on the tiniest little metal rod. It's like a strand of wire, and it's kind of like a click pencil mechanism where there's the Y shape. As I have found, when you take that apart, the spring goes doing, and all the parts fly out of it, and you either will never find them again, or if you do find them, they're impossible to put back into their place. So save yourself that frustration and don't take it apart. The original Mac keyboard, it uses Alps linear switches, doesn't it? Yeah, so it's completely different design.
A lot of
Yeah.
machines use those kind of keyboards because they're supposedly they're easier to type on.
Yeah,
And they're less, they're going to cause less stress if you type all day long.
yes, yep, and they have, yeah.
Yeah.
And they have full N key rollover. You can press all the keys at once and they'll all register. I actually use, maybe I'm a masochist. After fixing so many of these, I discovered that the first keyboard that had a Windows key on it after the Microsoft Natural keyboard was the Keytronic Professional Foam and Foil KB101. So I actually use one of these as my daily driver. So, and yes, I had to replace all the foam pads in it. Yeah.
Does the Lisa keyboard or any Lisa part have a modern substitute in a kind of hackable way? Could you replace the keyboard?
There has been, people have made an adapter that lets you hook up a modern keyboard to the system. So I guess, yes, in that sense, there is a way to get a system going. Obviously, it's nice to have the original matching keyboard. Everything will have the nice matching yellow patina. But and with the mice, these quadrature early Mac mice are they're pretty easy to come by. The actual Lisa 1 mice are not. It actually took me 10 years to find one that I was willing to pay the price for. Because yeah, if they're still new in the box and all beautiful and shiny, yeah, it's kind of crazy. So like this one, I probably shouldn't say this. I'm never planning to sell it later. This one's a little bit of a Frankenstein. It's got the guts of a Mac 128K mouse in it because when I got it, the electronics were broken and the cable was cut off. But I was able to assemble it into a working one for the 210.
In its Unix variants, does it have all the features of a Unix machine?
Mm-hmm.
Of 1980.
83, 84.
Unix
Yep.
is 1983, 84 is a very different animal than Unix and Linux are used to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you'll go to do like even just some common operations, and the command just won't be in there, and you'll be frustrated.
Sorry, I'm
Go ahead.
jumping in, but for the hard drive, even when you get your hard drive working, you don't always want to keep your hard drive. You want to run it like once a year, but that's about it. They're really loud. They can sound like jet planes, so especially the 210 internal one. So you can get an SD card adapter.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, we can fire this one up later. Not every profile, every widget and every profile is loud. Somehow I managed to have two quiet ones. But
Play loud.
yeah, I should.
Okay, you gotta get through this.
Another feature. So Wait, wrong way. So, what type of system is this? Is it a 2.5 or 2.10?
2.5.
So how do we know? It's got the parallel port. So who else in vintage computers can spot the elephant in the room in this picture? It's right there. So the clock calendar on the Lisa is run by a COPS microcontroller, which was the first commercially available microcontroller. It's that chip there. It's a little 4-bit guy. And it runs the calendar. I think it does the keyboard. No, it doesn't do the keyboard interface. It does a couple other low levels. Oh, it handles turning the system on and off. And you could actually, in the controller, you could schedule the system to turn on every Monday at 8 a.m. They never implemented that in the operating system, but the hardware supports it. And Apple wanted to be nice and have it such that if you picked your Lisa up and unplugged it and moved it across your desk and plugged it back in, you wouldn't have to reset the clock. So they put these NiCad batteries on here that gave you 3 hours of unplugged time to keep the system working. Unfortunately, as we know, NiCad batteries leak, and the damage that will happen to one of these systems when the NiCad batteries leak is extensive. You'll get all the traces will just be eaten off the board, and if you're ever shopping for one of these, well, the first warning sign is that it's a 2.5, not a 2.10, and that's a reason to look for a 2.10 instead, since they don't have a battery inside of them. Another warning sign to look for is you can look at the connectors on the back, and sometimes they'll look a little crusty just on the outside on the metal. And additionally, when the battery fails, the corrosion will fall down to the system motherboard, or it's just a backplane, but it'll fall down to the motherboard and just eat everything up, ruin the contacts on the card edges, and the first symptom you'll see, you'll get the system and it won't turn on. And that is actually what happened when I got this system, which the battery had been removed in 1997, and it still had eaten through. There's that picture. This is not my system, but it had eaten through this trace, which is how the COP microcontroller saw that the system was up and running. So it thought the system was already turned on, so it wouldn't try and turn it on again. So, enough battery doom and gloom. Let's move on to mass storage. So there were 2 hard drives that are available from Apple to use with the Lisa. You had the profile drives, which were available with a 5 megabyte or 10 megabyte Seagate disk mechanism, and you had the Apple-designed widget disks, something that, if you read the Lisa Frequently Asked Questions, they will tell you is that this brake, which clamps this is the voice coil actuator for the head mechanism, and you can see the data cable moving as the head moves. And in here there's a plastic piece, and this brake has a rubber bumper on it, and when the drive is off, it will hold the head servo in place so that the heads don't flop around the drive. This will stick in place, and generally all you need to do is just take this brake piece off, clean it up, and put it back on such that when it's off, let's see if I can get that to restart, you get a gap, and you can see it close. You are supposed to use a feeler gauge for it. There's a specification that Apple gives. In my experience, it's not super picky. As long as it's holding it in place while the drive is off and pulls away completely when the after the controller on the drive has said, okay, we've spun up to speed, disengage the brake and begin the seek test, it will work just fine. Another problem these disks will develop is that the spindles on these drives will get, on the head motors will get gummy. I've found on both of these drives a drop of 3-in-1 oil was needed to get them going again, but you can't access the bearing on the back side, and that if the bearing on this side is getting gummy, the one on the inside of the drive will also get gummy. And like Corey said, you need to fire the drives up periodically to keep that bearing free. In particular on the widget disk, if the bearing is at all gummed up, it just won't work. This actuator does not have a lot of power because that seek arm is very, very carefully balanced.
You can spin it by hand.
Yeah,
You
it's
spin them up by hand, you get it started, that runs for an hour.
Mhm. on that 210 system when I got it. I actually, to get the disk working, I had it spun up and had to grasp that spindle and just work it back and forth while the disk was spinning before it was able to overcome that resistance and the drive could take over. On the 10 megabyte profile, I have successfully oiled the backside bearing, but you have to take the top of the drive off. And at that point, you've let dust into the drive. So clean room is really, you need a clean room if you're going to do that. If you don't have a clean room, still is possible, shortest amount of time, and then after you seal it back up, let the drive run a while so that there's a scrubber inside the disk so it can clean it up. But at that point, the disk is compromised. But it wasn't working at all before, so. Both of these drives can be low-level formatted. On these profile drives, the controller has to be replaced, and I'll go over that in a little bit. But the widget disks contain all of the software to do the low-level format in the disk already. You just have to use another piece of software to call it up. Now, obviously, if your platters look like this, low-level format is not going to help you. But because of what we found on bit savers, someone was able to read through that and find this format track command, which has a password, which was helpfully written in pen on the document. And now we have software like NeoWidX, which the Apple intended you to format these drives by hooking them up to an Apple III, running a package called WidX that would do that formatting routine. And Tom Stapleton in the UK has implemented all of those routines in a piece of software that you can run right on the Lisa, which is super helpful. One thing you do need to look out for, though, is that on the widget disk, there's a fair number of socketed chips, and there's a really big gate array on the top of the controller. Those pins will corrode, and it'll look really good from the top, and then you pop it out, and they're all black with corrosion. So I had a disk that was not working correctly, and we'll level format it because it comes up, but it doesn't work. And then in trying to actually format it, it was just giving all kinds of really weird output. So cleaning those, it's a regular computer problem at this point. Clean all the pins and all the chips, you might be able to bring it back. On these profile disks, you need to change out the Z8 microprocessor for one with a socket. Now this would have shipped with one of these originally, but what Apple found out is that heat cycles were making this expand and contract a little bit, and the connections would go intermittent for just a moment, and it would happen while the head was seeking across the disk, and it would confuse the controller and tell it to do a write. So it would just scrub across the entire disk with like, leaving a trail of bad bits. And then the controller would detect it and mark all those sectors as bad and spare them out, which, that's fine, but then after that happened a couple times, you'd get this message popping up on your Lisa, hey, your disk isn't so healthy, go see your Apple service representative. The solution was what Apple has on this, which is a mask ROM Z8. But it's only 2 kilobytes, so there's not enough space to have the formatting routines and the normal running sector sparing routines in there. So you have to track down one of these Z8s. The ROMs are available on BitSavers now. If you don't want to spend hours and hours trying to keep the ye olde crusty drives going, there are modern solutions. Vintage Micros and John Woodall has the X Profile, which gives you an SD card and IDE interface and emulates one of these disks. This gives you the ability to have 2 virtual drives on one compact flash card, and you can switch between them. And you can also do a backup copy command to copy from the, like if you have an IDE disk, you can tell it to go to the CF card or vice versa. One nice thing about this is that you don't need any extra hardware to set it up. There are some little dials at the front of the card and a go button, and you can set it all up just with this device. There is also the IDE file, which is designed by Patrick Schaefer in Germany, and that's what's inside of here. And that lets you hook an IDE disk up to the Lisa. And this supports 7 volumes on one disk. And for this, you need a modern PC to just hook up to the serial port and issue some setup commands. So they're both pretty easy to get going. The Sigma 7 Systems product is a commercial product. You can go on his website and buy it right now. He charges $370. And the IDE file is a kit that Patrick runs the boards off for. I think he charges $60 for the boards, and all the passive parts you'll need are another $50 or so. After the Macintosh had been released, people started seeing, hey, I can spend $3,000 for this windowing system that does everything instead of $8,000 like the Lisa. Well, I'm just going to buy the Macintosh. And Lisa sales were not doing so hot. And Apple discontinued the product. But then they still had all these Lisas sitting around. And that's when they developed MacWorks to allow you to run. Well, actually, I take it back. MacWorks was developed before the Lisa was completely killed off, but they let you run Mac software on the Lisa and turned it into kind of a oddly shaped Mac Plus. Yeah.
I see on the ad there, the screen modification kit. What does that provide?
So we'll get to that. After Apple had basically, so years before when Apple had said, we're done with the Apple III, a company called Sun Remarketing in Logan, Utah, had developed some software packages for it and had a pretty good enterprise going selling the software. And they talked with Apple, and Apple let them take over the long-term support of the Apple III product. Based on that relationship, Apple had Sun Remarketing take over the remaining Lisa stock. So they shipped it all over to Sun's warehouse, and Sun would sell you Lisa parts on consignment from Apple. And so this is from November, winter 1988. They're still selling Lisas. And over the course of time, they developed a number of upgrades that could be installed into the system to keep it more relevant.
Well, that's most of it is because of Lisa Project. Lisa Project was the main product.
But you couldn't.
People ran Lisa 4 if they weren't running it as a big giant Mac. NASA had them for
Yes.
years.
Yeah, it was,
Mature.
the Lisa project was so much,
You did on Lisa.
yeah, better than anything else on the market at the time. But the one, well, we'll get to that in a moment, but so in 1988, Sun is still selling these things, so for $1,000, or for $1,200, you could get a Lisa with a 10 meg hard drive, or you could spend a little bit more money and get an 800K drive, or you could spend a little bit more money yet and get their SCSI card for use with Mac OS only. You could get their memory board that would let you install 2 megs of memory in the system instead of 1 meg. And you could get their disk controller board that would let you hook an MFM drive up to the Lisa's parallel port and keep it going rather than the original Apple disks. They also had what they called the screen modification kit. And recall earlier when I said that the Lisa's pixels are not square, they're wider than they are tall. Mac OS was designed for a system with square pixels. So when you fire it up on a stock Lisa, the screen is stretched. It's not that big of a deal if you're just doing word processing, but it looks a little weird. So Sun developed some replacement ROMs and this little transformer that you plug in line with the deflection yoke on the CRT that would up the screen resolution and convert it to square pixels. And the consideration with that is that once you install the square pixel mod, you can't run the Lisa software anymore. The only thing you can run is MacWorks.
That's a special version of that.
Yes, yeah, different boot version of MacWorks. Along that same vein, there were CPU upgrades that were developed. Up to an 18 megahertz 68,000 could be installed in place of the original 5 megahertz one. And John Woodall sold these guys, and they had memory that was right on the CPU add-on board, so it would be faster, and they had a SCSI chip right on the board. To go with that, they had a programmable clock to help with compatibility with the floppy drive, because as you cranked up the CPU speed, some other areas of the system got a little wonky. So you had to have this programmable frequency controller to correct for that.
Did you mention the other problem if you find instead of Lisa floppy disks?
That's a good point. So the Lisa was one of the first systems to have really effective DRM in it, digital rights management. One of the ROMs that you changed out when you installed this screen kit, that video ROM, contains a little bit of stuff to make the video state machine work. And the other thing it has in there is the Lisa's serial number. And the first time that you took your Lisa Office System, Lisa Write, or Programming Workshop disk and popped it in the machine and duplicated the file to install it onto the disk, you pop up with this message. Hey, this is the first time that this disk has been used. We're going to serialize this so that it only works with your Lisa. Continue? And then from that point on, that disk would only work with that Lisa system. And similarly, you couldn't install a bunch of stuff on a profile and then pick it up with you and plug it into your buddy's system. It doesn't run because it says the serial number doesn't match. The bootloader in UniPlus is serialized to the system the same way. So if you look on eBay, on Vintage Micros, you'll see that John sells CF cards to work with the X profile that are preloaded with Mac OS, with the Office system, preloaded with Unix, preloaded with that. Included in that is a replacement video ROM chip that has his master serial number in it, so that essentially he's just setting the same serial number on every system. That's how he's getting around that DRM. That has been cracked. It's stored in the first few bytes of the disk, and if you go and zero it out, it converts the disk back into a master.
If you use Lisa EM, the emulator, you can reset images. So if you switch between an
Yep.
or set it to whatever you want.
Let's see, how am I doing on time? I'm out? Well, the other recent development is that Vintage Micros is now selling brand new manufactured motherboards and I/O cards and CPU boards and dual parallel port floppy or dual parallel port boards. You need a case and power supply. They're very well made. They are asking quite a bit of money for them, but they are available. You can ring them up and get this brand new board today. So now you're sitting pretty. Your system powers up. Everything's great. But wait, how do you get the software into the computer? Fortunately, John at Vintage Micros has written a fantastic utility for the system called the Basic Lisa Utility. And this allows you to take a disk copy 4.2 formatted image, load it into this Lisa over the serial port, and write it to a disk.
You can even make the blue disc with the serial.
Yes, that's what's the bootstrapping function is what I think is really cool. If you, and I had to do this because when I moved from Michigan to Virginia, I didn't have any of my old Mac stuff with me, and I had the Lisa, and I needed to make a blue disk. So on the Lisa, you can go into the ROM monitor and type out some lines of code, and he has a serial loader you can type in to get the BLU software into the Lisa, download it in, and then you can write it to a floppy. And so from nothing, and just a modern PC with a serial port, you can get the software into one of these machines. The other thing that you can do is you can format the hard drives with this. You can copy the hard drives down to an image, and you can copy a hard drive to a hard drive. So it is a really fantastically useful utility. And for anyone who would like one, I have some BLU floppies with me that I wanted to share with the rest of the class. So come see me after the presentation. I also have a CD with all of the various Lisa bits of software and documents that I could find. If you'd like a copy of that, come see me as well. So, yeah.